What would you do if the world saw you only as a servant, until one unexpected moment forced everyone to see who you really are? At a glittering outdoor engagement party in Manhattan, Grace Miller, a quiet waitress, becomes the unwilling center of attention when a single mistake shatters a tray of crystal glasses. The laughter is cruel, the humiliation sharp. Michael Carter, a wealthy oil tycoon with power to burn, seizes the chance to make her shame into a spectacle. Before hundreds of guests, he throws out a taunting challenge. If Grace can outdance his glamorous fiancée in a tango, he will marry her instead. The crowd roars with laughter, but Grace does not. Instead, she lifts her head and accepts. In that instant, the party transforms from a celebration into a stage where arrogance collides with defiance. When the music begins, the atmosphere shifts. Michael's fiancée, polished but uninspired, performs first. Then Grace takes the floor, and something extraordinary happens. Her movements, precise and fiery, hold the entire audience captive. For the first time, whispers turn into stunned silence. But just as the applause rises, Grace reveals there is more to her than anyone suspected. Behind her uniform lies a past filled with talent, betrayal, and a truth that threatens to unravel the life of the man who mocked her. Now Michael Carter faces a challenge far greater than a dance. Grace is not just here to reclaim her dignity. She is here for justice. And as the spotlight tightens, secrets long buried begin to surface, setting the stage for a confrontation that could destroy everything. Will the powerful billionaire prevail, or will the underestimated waitress rewrite the story? Where are you watching from? Share in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this. Now, let's get started. The summer sun draped Manhattan in a golden haze as the Meridian Hotel's gardens sparkled with white linens, crystal glasses, and roses arranged in tall ivory vases. It was a scene straight out of a dream, or perhaps a fantasy reserved only for the powerful. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the soft clink of silverware and the hum of violins. The occasion was nothing short of grand. The engagement party of Michael Carter, one of the city's most notorious oil magnates, and Emily Parker, a model whose beauty alone could silence a room. Every guest was dressed in shades of crimson and black, their outfits as polished as their ambition. Beneath the shade of golden parasols, deals were whispered, fortunes flaunted, and envy brewed behind champagne flutes. But among them all, unseen and uncelebrated, was Grace Miller. Grace moved quietly between the tables, balancing a silver tray filled with crystal glasses. Her green and white uniform made her stand out like a weed in a rose garden. She had learned to make herself invisible, blending into the background of Manhattan's elite celebrations. For 3 years, she had worked here, keeping her head down, hiding behind polite smiles, and offering nothing but efficiency. Yet tonight, fate had its own choreography planned. It began with a slip, barely a tremor at first. A misstep, perhaps caused by the uneven stone pathway or the weight of the tray itself. Then the disaster. The tray tilted forward, and time seemed to slow. Crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor, the sound cutting through music and chatter like a gunshot. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Grace froze, her breath caught in her throat, her cheeks burning as though the sun had fallen directly upon her. The glittering fragments sparkled cruelly at her feet, reflecting her shame. From across the garden, a booming laugh erupted. Michael Carter, tall and commanding in his black tuxedo, stepped forward with a grin that dripped arrogance. "Do you have any idea," he said loudly, making sure every guest heard, "how much those glasses cost? Each one is worth more than your monthly salary." The crowd chuckled, some nervously, others with genuine delight, at the spectacle of someone else's humiliation. Grace bent down quickly, her hands trembling as she tried to gather the broken pieces with a cloth. Her ears burned, but she kept her head lowered, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Emily Parker, radiant in a red satin gown, leaned against Michael's arm, her smile sharp as a blade. "Michael," she purred, "you should really consider firing her on the spot. People like that don't belong at parties like this." Grace's chest tightened, but she remained silent. Her heart pounded as if begging her to speak, to defend herself, but the weight of years spent in silence kept her lips sealed. Michael tilted his head, watching her like a predator circling prey. His voice rose above the murmurs. "Tell me, Grace, do you know how to dance?" The question was absurd, cruel even. Some guests laughed outright. Others smirked, waiting for her to stumble again. Grace looked up, her eyes wide with confusion. I don't understand, sir," she whispered. Michael's grin widened. "It's simple. If you can dance this tango better than my fiancée, I'll marry you instead of her." Gasps and laughter rippled through the crowd. The idea was ridiculous, a joke dressed as entertainment. Emily laughed so hard she nearly dropped her glass. "Michael, please, this is beneath us. She probably can't even walk properly, let alone dance." But Grace did not lower her gaze this time. Instead, she looked directly into Michael's eyes, and something flickered there. Something not born of fear nor humiliation, but a quiet fire long contained. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The violin softened, the laughter dimmed, and Grace's voice, steady and firm, cut through the silence. "I accept your challenge." The garden froze. Forks clinked against plates. A breeze rustled the roses, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Michael blinked, stunned, before his smirk returned. He leaned closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "Are you sure, Grace? Because once you make a fool of yourself, there will be no excuses." Grace straightened her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her silence lift. Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "No excuses," she said, "but you'll have to keep your word, even if you regret it." The air tightened like a string pulled to its breaking point. Guests whispered in disbelief. Emily's laughter faltered, her confidence slipping just slightly. Michael, trapped in his own bravado, had no choice but to agree. And so, with crystal shards still glittering at her feet, Grace Miller stepped onto a stage she had never expected, ready to rewrite the story that fate had handed her. The garden of the Meridian Hotel had never been so silent. A moment ago it had been filled with laughter, with glasses raised and shallow jokes bouncing between marble columns. Now the air carried a different weight, the kind that presses against the skin and makes every heartbeat sound louder. Grace Miller stood in the center of the courtyard, her hands no longer trembling. Her chin lifted just enough to show that she would not be crushed so easily. Around her, the guests whispered, exchanging looks of disbelief, as if they could not fathom the absurdity of a waitress challenging the glamorous Emily Parker to a tango. Emily, radiant in her red gown, smiled with the certainty of a woman who had been admired her entire life. She reached for Michael's hand and brushed it against her lips, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Shall we end this quickly?" she whispered to him, though her words were loud enough for Grace to hear. Michael smirked, his voice booming across the courtyard. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves. Tonight, not only do we celebrate my engagement, but we'll witness a performance that will decide destiny itself." The crowd chuckled uneasily. Some were eager for entertainment, others uncomfortable with the cruelty of it all. Yet no one dared to intervene. Power had a way of silencing compassion. The DJ, uncertain but obedient, switched tracks. The haunting strains of an Argentine bandoneon floated through the warm evening air, the opening notes of Por una cabeza. The melody carried both danger and desire, setting the stage for the confrontation. Emily moved first. She stepped confidently onto the open space, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a declaration of victory. Her arms stretched wide, her hips swayed with practiced sensuality, and she spun gracefully, her gown catching the light. She posed, she smirked, she commanded attention. But her movements, though elegant, were hollow. They were rehearsed, not lived. The applause that followed was polite, obligatory, the kind given at fashion shows where beauty mattered more than soul. Grace watched in silence. Every fiber of her being was taut with pressure. She remembered the sting of Michael's laughter, the cruel smirk on Emily's face, and the countless nights she had worked invisibly while others basked in glory. Tonight was not just about dance. It was about reclaiming the voice she had buried under years of silence. As Emily finished her final twirl and bowed, the crowd applauded half-heartedly. Michael clapped louder than anyone, his pride swelling. "Beautiful, my love," he said, kissing Emily's hand. "Now let's watch the help embarrass herself." The words stung, but Grace refused to flinch. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the music seep into her bones. When she stepped forward, she was no longer the waitress in a uniform. She was something else, something remembered, something fierce. Her first step was soft, almost hesitant, but then it grew, flowing into the rhythm like water finding its current. Her arms curved through the air with a grace that silenced the whispers. Her legs moved with precision, slicing the floor with spins so sharp they seemed to cut through the tension itself. Each movement told a story of loss, of betrayal, of longing, of resilience. The guests leaned forward, their jaws slack. It was as if the music had summoned a different woman altogether, one they had never seen before. Her body spoke in the language of Tango, and it was a language filled with passion and truth. Emily's smile faltered. Michael's grin thinned into something uncertain. The applause that followed each turn grew louder, rising like waves against the arrogance that had begun this cruel game. When Grace lifted her head, her eyes shone with unspoken words. "I am not invisible. Not anymore." And in that moment, the party was no longer Michael's. The stage belonged to Grace. The final note of the tango still lingered in the air when the crowd erupted. Chairs scraped back, hands came together, and applause filled the courtyard with a thunder that even the bandoneon could not match. For a long moment, Grace Miller remained in the center of the floor, her chest rising and falling with deliberate calm, her eyes steady on the night sky above. She did not bow. She did not smile. She simply stood, and in her silence there was a defiance more powerful than any triumphant gesture. Emily Parker's face had lost its glow of certainty. She clapped stiffly, her jaw tight, her gaze darting toward Michael as though seeking his reassurance. Michael Carter, however, did not move. His hands hung at his sides, his expression caught between disbelief and irritation. The world he so carefully controlled had tilted, and he did not know how to right it. The applause quieted into murmurs, into whispers that traveled like fire through dry grass. Where did she learn to move like that? She's not just a waitress, is she? I've seen professionals on stage with less power. Grace heard every word, though she kept her head high. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of invisibility lift. These people, who had never looked at her as more than a pair of hands carrying wine, now struggled to comprehend who she truly was. Michael broke the silence with a scoff that sounded more fragile than he intended. Impressive, for someone who spends her days polishing glasses. He forced a laugh, but it came out brittle, like glass ready to crack. Tell us, Grace, where did you pick up those tricks? From YouTube tutorials? From sweeping dance floors after the real dancers were gone? Laughter bubbled from a few guests, but it lacked conviction. Most eyes remained locked on Grace, hungry for an explanation. She turned to Michael slowly, her voice calm, her words measured. You want to know where I learned? Buenos Aires, at the Fernandez Academy of Dance. I studied there for 5 years before becoming head instructor. The courtyard hushed again. A name like Fernandez carried weight. It was the Harvard of Tango. Emily snorted, her voice sharp with disbelief. That's impossible. If you were a professional, why are you serving canapés at a hotel? Grace paused, letting the silence stretch, her gaze cutting through Emily's confidence. Because 7 years ago, my career was destroyed. I was accused of a theft I did not commit. A theft at a luxury hotel very much like this one. Her eyes shifted back to Michael, holding him there, pinning him against the weight of memory. And the man who orchestrated that lie did it to protect his son. Michael's lips parted, but no words came. His face paled as recognition flickered like lightning across his features. The guests whispered louder now, a tide of speculation rising around them. She's accusing him? What does she mean? Could it be true? Emily stepped forward, her laughter forced and shrill. This is madness! A pathetic attempt to spin a sob story and win sympathy. She's making it up. But Grace did not flinch. She reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out an old, weathered business card, the kind that carried the simple elegance of authority. She held it high enough for the crowd to see. This is my proof, she said softly, but her voice carried like a bell. I was once respected. I was once trusted. And then, in one night, it was all taken from me. But lies don't stay buried forever. Michael swallowed hard, his fists clenching at his sides. You're playing a dangerous game, he muttered under his breath, too low for most to hear. But Grace heard, and her lips curved into a faint smile. No, Michael, she replied quietly, her words laced with steel. The game has only just begun. The courtyard seemed to shiver under her declaration. Guests leaned closer, hungry for the truth, while Michael stood frozen in a trap of his own making. Grace had danced her way back into the light, but now she had begun to reveal the shadow that followed Michael Carter wherever he went. The party, once a symbol of his power, was becoming something else entirely, a courtroom. and the trial had only just started. The hum of whispers grew louder, filling the courtyard like a storm gathering on the horizon. Guests leaned closer to one another, their jeweled earrings and cufflinks catching the candlelight as rumors spread faster than the breeze. Some looked at Michael Carter with suspicion, others with doubt, and a few with poorly veiled anticipation. Power had always shielded him, but for the first time, cracks began to show. Michael's jaw was tight, his smile gone. He forced out a laugh that rang hollow in the heavy silence. "You've had your moment, Grace. A pretty story, told to stir pity. But that's all it is, a story." Grace took a slow step forward, her shoes clicking softly against the marble, each sound deliberate, unyielding. "A story," she said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the crowd's murmurs. "Stories don't come with recordings." From her apron pocket, she pulled out a small digital recorder. Its black surface gleamed beneath the golden lights. She pressed the button, and suddenly, Michael's own voice echoed through the speakers connected to the DJ's sound system. "Listen, Gerald. We need to resolve this quickly. My son may have made a mistake, but I can't let this tarnish our family's reputation. Plant the jewelry in the dance teacher's locker. She's young. She's black. No one will question it. I'll transfer 50 grand to your account today." Gasps shot through the courtyard like arrows. Glasses clinked against tables as hands trembled. Emily Parker covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror, her glamorous confidence shattered. Michael staggered a step back, sweat glistening along his hairline. That could be anyone's voice. Technology can fake anything these days." But his words lacked conviction, and the guests knew it. Their stares bore into him like 1,000 accusations. Grace's eyes, steady and relentless, never left his. "Yes, digital tricks exist, which is why I didn't stop at a recording." She reached into her apron again and produced a small flash drive, holding it between her fingers as though it were a torch. Emails, bank transfers, 7 years' worth of documentation. Every lie you thought was buried, I unearthed. The crowd erupted again, this time not with laughter, but with outrage and disbelief. Phones were raised, videos were recorded. Michael Carter, who once thrived on spectacle, now found himself its prisoner. Emily's voice trembled as she turned to him. "Michael, is this true?" Her question was not soft, not private. It carried across the entire courtyard, and for the first time, Michael's silence betrayed him more than any answer could. Grace lifted her chin, her voice carrying the weight of 7 years of injustice. "You thought I was powerless. You thought silence meant defeat. But silence can also mean patience. Patience to gather, to wait, to strike when the world is finally watching." The courtyard was a living thing now, buzzing with tension and disbelief. Some guests pulled away from Michael as though corruption were contagious. Others whispered his name with disgust, their earlier admiration dissolving into scorn. Michael tried to compose himself, his voice cracking under the strain. "Grace, let's talk about this privately. No." Grace's interruption was soft, but it silenced him more thoroughly than a shout. "This is not a private matter. You humiliated me in public. You destroyed my career in public. And tonight, in front of every person who once applauded your power, the truth will be revealed in public." For a fleeting moment, Michael's mask slipped entirely. Fear flickered in his eyes, raw and undeniable. The empire he had built on lies was trembling beneath him. Grace took a step back, allowing the weight of her words to settle into every heart present. She could feel the shift in the air, the turning of the tide. No longer was she the invisible waitress. Tonight, she was something far more dangerous. She was the truth, standing in flesh and blood. And Michael Carter, for the first time in years, realized he had no script to save him. The courtyard felt like a theater after the climax of a tragedy. No one laughed anymore. No one raised their glass in casual indifference. The wealthy guests who had once orbited Michael Carter's brilliance now kept their distance, their polished shoes shifting uncomfortably against the stone floor. The man who had humiliated Grace was suddenly the one shrinking under the weight of countless eyes. Michael tried to recover, adjusting his cufflinks as though dignity could be stitched back into place. His voice wavered but reached for authority. "This is a ridiculous stunt. None of this means anything. I am Michael Carter, and I—" But before he could finish, a calm, resonant voice cut through the tension. "Correction, Mr. Carter. You were Michael Carter, the untouchable businessman. Tonight, you are a man stripped bare." Every head turned toward the sound. Walking into the courtyard was Mr. Howard, a distinguished attorney in a navy suit, his silver hair gleaming beneath the garden lights. His presence carried the gravity of decades in the courtroom, quiet, commanding, immovable. And flanking him were two men in dark suits. Their movements were precise, professional. As they approached, one of them raised a badge that caught the light like a blade. "Agent Davis, FBI," the man announced firmly. His words silenced even the whispers. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Carter, and an order to seize your assets." The crowd gasped again, a sound like a wave crashing over stone. Some guests pulled out their phones to capture the moment, their lenses glowing like dozens of watchful eyes. Michael stumbled back, his hand tightening on Emily's arm as though she could anchor him. But Emily pulled away, her face twisted in betrayal. "Michael," she hissed, "you told me you were a respectable man. You swore your business was clean." Her red gown swayed as she stepped back, creating distance that felt like a declaration. Michael's voice cracked, sweat running down his temple. "This is absurd. Grace, you can't do this to me. Whatever you think you've found, I can fix it. I have money." "Your money is gone," Mr. Howard interrupted, his tone calm but merciless. "Your accounts were frozen 2 hours ago. Your empire is collapsing as we speak. And the woman you dismissed as invisible has spent 3 years documenting everything you thought no one noticed." Grace stood still, but her presence was luminous, commanding the courtyard more powerfully than Michael ever had. She spoke softly, and yet every syllable carried. "I served you drinks. I cleared your meetings. I poured your wine and listened when you believed no one was listening. Every word you spoke in arrogance became another thread in the net I've woven. Tonight, that net closes around you." Michael's chest rose and fell rapidly. His arrogance had drained away, leaving only a desperate man flailing in the ruins of his control. He turned to the crowd, his voice trembling. "Don't believe her. She's lying, manipulating, framing me." But the crowd had already made its judgment. Their silence was heavy, their eyes cold. A room that once celebrated him now condemned him with 1,000 unspoken verdicts. Emily's hand trembled as she removed the sparkling diamond ring from her finger. She looked at it for one long, mournful second, then dropped it onto the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed like a final gavel strike. "I will not marry a criminal," she said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with humiliation. Michael lunged toward her, but Agent Davis stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the light. "Michael Carter, you are under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, bribery, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words struck harder than any blow. Michael's shoulders sagged, his face pale. For the first time in decades, he was no longer the man holding power. He was the man losing everything. Grace watched, her expression steady, though deep inside her heart throbbed with conflicting emotions. She had dreamed of this moment for years, yet the reality was heavier, more human than she had imagined. Still, as Michael Carter's wrists were bound and his empire collapsed, Grace understood. Justice was finally stepping into the light. The courtyard, moments ago filled with whispered speculation, exploded into chaos. Flashbulbs pierced the night like lightning, the sudden storm of cameras blinding and relentless. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Reporters poured through the gilded gates of the Meridian Hotel, their voices overlapping in a chorus of questions that clawed through the air. "Mr. Carter, is it true you laundered millions through offshore accounts? Did you frame your own employees to protect your son? Were government officials bribed under your direction?" Michael Carter, who once relished the spotlight, now shrank beneath it. Sweat trickled down his temples as his carefully groomed hair clung damply to his forehead. His tuxedo, once a symbol of prestige, suddenly seemed suffocating. He raised his hands as if to shield himself, but there was no shelter, not from the lenses, not from the questions, not from the judgment written on every face around him. "I have no comment," he muttered, his voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding, but the crowd did not allow his excuses to take root. Their demands only grew louder, their voices rising in a wave of accusation. Emily Parker, once the picture of loyalty, stood several feet away, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze cold and unforgiving. The diamond ring that had bound her future to his still lay shattered on the marble floor, a glittering reminder of broken promises. Grace watched in silence too, her hands clasped in front of her. She had imagined this moment countless times during sleepless nights. Michael finally exposed, his empire crumbling, his arrogance stripped away. Yet as she looked at him now, cornered and unraveling, she felt something unexpected stirring inside her. Not triumph, but a heavy, sobering clarity. Justice, when it arrived, was not glamorous. It was raw. It was devastating. One reporter pushed closer, thrusting a microphone into the chaos. "Miss Miller," he called out, his voice sharp. "You were the one who exposed him, weren't you? What do you have to say to the world right now?" The crowd hushed, shifting its focus. Dozens of eyes and cameras turned toward Grace. For years, she had been invisible, but now every lens pointed at her as though she were the only person in the room who mattered. Grace drew a slow breath, her voice steady, her words deliberate. "Michael Carter destroyed my career, my reputation, and nearly my spirit, all to cover his son's crimes. For 7 years, I carried the weight of lies I didn't deserve. But I refused to let those lies define me. I gathered proof. I waited. I endured. And tonight, I stand here, not as a victim, but as a reminder. Truth always finds its way to the light." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, followed by the clatter of keyboards and the rapid-fire clicks of cameras. Grace's voice grew stronger, more resonant. "This isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who has been silenced, humiliated, or cast aside by people who believed their power would protect them forever. Power built on injustice is nothing more than a house of cards, and sooner or later, it falls. Michael shook his head violently, his voice rising in desperation. She's lying. This is all revenge. Agent Davis stepped closer, his tone firm and unyielding. No, Mr. Carter. This is justice. The words rang across the courtyard like a final verdict. The reporters shouted louder, their questions overlapping, their lenses capturing every tremor in Michael's hands as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. His empire, his reputation, his carefully curated image, all of it collapsed in the span of minutes. Grace stood firm, the glow of the cameras softening against her calm expression. For the first time in 7 years, she felt air filling her lungs without the weight of bitterness. The humiliation she once endured had transformed into something else entirely, a testimony. And as Michael was led away, hunched and defeated, the courtyard no longer felt like a ballroom. It felt like history being rewritten under the stars. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night at the Meridian Hotel. Yet the echoes of shattered crystal, the gasps of the crowd, and Michael Carter's pale, broken face still lived in Grace Miller's memory. Those moments had rewritten her story in the eyes of the world. What had once been her shame became her vindication. What had once been her silence became her testimony. Now, as she stood in the wings of Lincoln Center, the grand stage that had launched countless legends, Grace felt the kind of nerves that came not from fear but from reverence. The velvet curtains brushed against her fingertips, and the hum of an expectant audience seeped through like the steady roar of the ocean. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle. This was not just another performance. This was a homecoming. A stagehand gave her the cue, and Grace stepped out into the light. The audience rose in unison, their applause thunderous, their faces glowing with admiration. The viral video of her tango at the engagement party had traveled across the country, igniting conversations about resilience, injustice, and the power of art to carry truth. Tonight, they had come not merely to watch her dance, but to witness her rebirth. The music began, a haunting tango, its rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat. Grace moved with a precision that came not from rehearsal, but from lived experience. Every turn carried the weight of 7 years of loss. Every step radiated the fire of survival. Her body was not just moving, it was speaking, telling a story only she could tell. The betrayal that nearly broke her, the courage that sustained her, and the justice that had finally arrived. The audience leaned forward, silent, spellbound. In that silence, Grace felt something wash over her. Release. She was no longer dancing to prove herself. She was dancing because she was free. When the final note struck, Grace froze in her last pose, her arms extended, her chest lifted toward the light. And then came the sound, applause so fierce it shook the hall. The ovation lasted 3 minutes, a wave of gratitude crashing over her again and again. Tears welled in her eyes. But this time they were not from humiliation or bitterness. They were from joy. Backstage, Mr. Howard was waiting. His kind eyes shone as he handed her a folder. "It's official," he said. "Michael's appeals have been denied. 25 years, no parole." Grace nodded, a quiet exhale escaping her lips. She didn't smile, but there was a deep peace in her eyes. "And Daniel?" she asked softly. "Sentenced to 12 years for drug trafficking and laundering," Howard replied. "The Carter empire is dismantled, their assets seized, their influence gone." He paused, studying her. "And you, Grace? You have more offers than I can count. Dance companies, film directors, academies, they all want you. Grace let the words settle, then laughed gently, a sound filled with wonder more than triumph. 7 years ago, I was no one. Tonight, they call me a star. But fame isn't what I'm after. Not anymore. Howard tilted his head. Then what is it you want? Grace glanced at the stage door, where young dancers peeked in with wide eyes, inspired by what they had just witnessed. I want to build something lasting. A place where kids who've been overlooked or pushed aside can discover their worth. Not just through dance, but through resilience. I want to show them that no matter how hard the world tries to silence them, their voices matter. Howard's smile deepened. Lines of admiration etched across his face. Grace, you don't just dance. You lead. For the first time, she believed it. As Grace stepped outside into the crisp Manhattan night, the city lights sparkled like 1,000 possibilities. The same streets that had once carried her tears now seemed to glow with promise. She had lost 7 years, but she had gained something more precious. A purpose unshakable, unbreakable, undeniable. Her story was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation. And tonight, beneath the lights of Lincoln Center, Grace Miller stepped fully into the woman she was always meant to be. The performance at Lincoln Center had ended, but the echoes of applause still pulsed in Grace Miller's heart. She lingered in her dressing room, her hair damp with sweat, her muscles humming from the dance that had carried her through both past pain and present triumph. The room smelled faintly of roses, gifts from strangers who had become admirers. Letters and cards piled the table, messages scrawled with gratitude and admiration. She sat quietly, absorbing it all, when Mr. Howard stepped in. His steady presence felt like a lighthouse cutting through the haze of emotions swirling inside her. He handed her a crisp white envelope, its seal embossed with a crest she knew well. "The Fernandez Academy," Howard said softly. Grace's breath caught. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal, unfolding the elegant stationery inside. The words were formal, but the meaning was simple. They wanted her to return as their principal artistic director. The same academy where she had once been a rising star now called her back to lead. For a moment, the world tilted. She could almost smell the polished wooden floors of the Buenos Aires studio, hear the laughter of young dancers, feel the heartbeat of a city where tango was more than art. It was identity. Returning meant reclaiming the life that had been stolen from hers. Howard watched her carefully. "It's an honor, Grace. Few ever receive such an invitation. They see you not only as an artist, but as a leader." Grace folded the letter slowly, her eyes misting. 7 years ago, I would have given anything for this. Now, she hesitated, her voice softer. Now I'm not sure it's what I want. Howard raised a brow. Why not? She leaned back, her gaze shifting to the open window where the lights of Manhattan glowed like scattered diamonds. Because my life isn't just about reclaiming what I lost anymore. It's about what I can give. I've been thinking of starting my own school here. One that doesn't just teach dance, but teaches resilience. A place for kids who've been overlooked, who can't afford lessons, who need someone to believe in them. Howard smiled gently, his silver eyes gleaming with admiration. Grace, you're speaking of legacy. That's far greater than titles. Grace felt the weight of choice pressing against her chest. The academy represented redemption, a chance to prove to the world that the accusations had never defined her. But the idea of her own school felt different, more intimate, more urgent. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about planting seeds for the future. Her mind drifted back to the young dancers she had seen peeking through the stage doors earlier that evening. Their wide eyes, filled with wonder, reminded her of her own at that age. She thought of all the children whose voices were drowned out by the world's cruelty, children who might never discover their strength unless someone lifted them into the light. Emily Parker's words from that night at the Meridian replayed in her mind. People like that don't belong here. Grace clenched her fists gently. No child should ever feel like they didn't belong. Howard placed a hand on her shoulder. There's no wrong choice here, Grace. Either path will honor your journey. The question is, which one will honor your heart? Grace turned the folded letter in her hand, the paper smooth and fragile against her skin. She smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered with both longing and conviction. I need time, but deep down, I think I already know. She stood, walking toward the mirror. The woman staring back at her no longer carried the shame of a false accusation, nor the invisibility of a waitress. She was a survivor, a teacher, a leader in her own right. And as the city lights blinked beyond the window, Grace whispered to herself, "It's not about going back. It's about building forward." 3 months after her Lincoln Center triumph, Grace Miller unlocked the heavy oak doors of her new studio for the very first time. The space smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, the mirrors lining the walls gleaming like promises yet to be fulfilled. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, scattering across the floor where the faint chalk outlines of dance positions had already been marked. The sign outside read, "The Washington Dance Academy," named not for herself, but for her late grandmother, who had once told her, "Grace, the world will try to break you, but the rhythm inside you will carry you through." Those words had lived in her bones for years, and now they lived on in the very name of the place. She stood in the empty studio for a moment, breathing deeply, letting gratitude rise inside her. The room was still, but she could already hear it filled with music, laughter, and the determined shuffle of small feet learning to move with courage. Soon, the stillness was broken. One by one, children began to arrive, their parents guiding them through the door. Some wore worn-out sneakers, others clutched borrowed ballet slippers. Their eyes were wide with both excitement and uncertainty. Grace greeted each of them with warmth, bending to their level, learning their names as though each one was a sacred melody. A boy with restless eyes and a hoodie pulled tight shuffled in last. His name was Marcus, 12 years old, with a posture that carried both defiance and exhaustion. Grace knelt before him, offering a smile that was gentle but firm. "Do you like to dance, Marcus?" she asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Never tried. My mom said I should come here so I stay out of trouble." Grace's heart tightened, remembering her own battles against the world's cruelty. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Then this is the perfect place to start. Here, no one cares where you came from, only where you're willing to go." The class began. The children giggled nervously as the first notes of music played. Their movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, but sincere. Grace guided them patiently, correcting postures with gentle touches, offering encouragement with every step. "Don't think about perfection," she told them. "Think about expression. Let your bodies tell the truth your hearts can't always say out loud." Slowly, something remarkable unfolded. The children began to loosen, to laugh, to let go of the heaviness they carried. Feet that had shuffled with hesitation now stomped with joy. Arms once crossed in shyness stretched boldly into the air. Even Marcus, reluctant at first, found himself grinning as he tried a spin, stumbling, then laughing when Grace applauded his effort. Parents watched from the edges, some with tears in their eyes. They weren't just witnessing their children learning to dance. They were witnessing them learning to believe in themselves. After the class, one mother approached Grace. She was a nurse, her uniform still wrinkled from a long shift. Her voice cracked with emotion as she said, "Miss Miller, I don't know how to thank you. We could never afford lessons like this anywhere else. You're giving them more than dance. You're giving them hope." Grace swallowed hard, her throat tight with feeling. "Hope is exactly what they deserve," she whispered. As evening settled over Manhattan, Grace locked the studio doors once more, the sound of children's laughter still echoing in her ears. She leaned against the cool brick wall outside, gazing up at the city lights. For the first time in years, she realized she no longer measured her worth against the pain Michael Carter had caused. She had transformed that pain into something far more powerful, a space where others could rise. The academy was not just a school. It was a promise that every child, no matter how overlooked or underestimated, could step into the light and find their rhythm. Grace smiled softly to herself. She had reclaimed her dignity, but more importantly, she had passed it on. The Washington Dance Academy had been open for nearly a year when Grace Miller found herself alone in the studio late one evening. The children had gone home hours earlier, their laughter still echoing faintly in the corners of the room. The mirrors reflected only her now, a solitary figure in a space alive with dreams. She walked slowly across the polished floor, her hand brushing the bar, her steps unhurried. Tonight, she wasn't the instructor or the survivor or the headline that once dominated newspapers. Tonight, she was simply Grace, a woman at peace with her own story. She paused before the mirror, staring into the face that had weathered so much. The lines were deeper, the eyes a little older, but there was light in them again, steady, unwavering. She thought of Michael Carter, now serving a 25-year sentence. His empire dissolved, his name synonymous with corruption. There had been a time she longed to see him broken, to savor his ruin like a victory. But now, when she thought of him, there was only a faint, bittersweet sadness. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Hatred was never going to set me free." Her words lingered in the stillness, honest and raw. She remembered those years of bitterness, when she carried her pain like armor, when she believed that revenge was the only way to reclaim her dignity. But revenge had not been the ending. It was the doorway. What gave her freedom was the choice to build, to transform her suffering into something beautiful. The door creaked open, and Marcus, the boy who once stumbled into her class with defiance in his eyes, peeked in. He had stayed behind to practice, his sneakers squeaking lightly as he entered. "Miss Miller," he said shyly, "can I show you something?" Grace smiled warmly, gesturing for him to step forward. He pressed play on the small speaker he carried, and music filled the room. Marcus moved awkwardly at first, but then with growing confidence. His steps were imperfect, but his spirit was radiant, bursting through each movement. When he stumbled, he laughed, and Grace clapped along, her heart swelling. When he finished, panting and grinning, he looked at her with hopeful eyes. "Was it good?" Grace knelt before him, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. Her voice was tender but strong. "Marcus, it was honest. That matters more than perfect. Dance isn't about never falling. It's about rising again. Every time. And you did." He beamed, his smile wide and unguarded, before running off into the night, leaving Grace alone once more. But she wasn't lonely. She felt surrounded by voices, by memories, by the unshakable truth that her life now belonged to something greater than herself. She walked to the window and gazed out at the city. Manhattan's skyline glittered, each light a reminder of resilience, of countless lives pushing forward despite the odds. She thought of the question a reporter had once asked her. If you could say one thing to Michael Carter today, what would it be? She whispered the answer aloud, her voice steady, almost prayerful. Thank you. Because by trying to break me, you forced me to discover a strength I never knew I had. You may have stolen 7 years, but you gave me a lifetime of purpose. Grace stood tall, her reflection in the mirror no longer haunted, but whole. Her academy, her students, her story, they were all proof that true victory wasn't in tearing down those who harmed us. It was in building something so enduring, so luminous, that the harm became irrelevant. As she turned off the lights and stepped into the night, the city embraced her with open arms. Grace Miller no longer carried the weight of injustice. She carried a legacy. And her final lesson, etched deeply into her soul, was one she longed to pass on. The best revenge is not destruction, but creation. Not bitterness, but resilience. Not silence, but the courage to dance again.